Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 460. All right, guys, welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise awareness of trauma and to support new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. If you're a therapist of any kind, interested in learning about trauma, and you're looking for support and inspiration, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com. All right, let's get started. This episode is sponsored by CPTSD Foundation.org. And one of the great things about, for me, about doing this podcast is that I get to speak to and work with amazing people. And Athena Moberg, the CEO and founder of CPTSDFoundation.org, is one of those individuals. This woman is on fire. I got to meet her several months ago here in San Francisco. We had breakfast together and just had a really great talk. And I got to learn about her foundation and what they're doing. They provide complex trauma survivors and practitioners with compassionate support, skills, and trauma-informed education. Athena works together with expert practitioners and treatment centers, offering daily touch points to anyone currently in trauma therapy or who wants a safe place to come, feel heard and validated between therapy appointments. Some of the resources they offer are daily recovery support, a healing book club. They have free support groups. They also offer this really cool thing where they can send you texts just to encourage you and help you heal on your journey. So check them out at cptsdfoundation.org/trauma therapist podcast. Once again, that's cptsdfoundation.org/trauma therapist podcast. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Johanna Lynn. Johanna, welcome.
Oh, thanks. Great to be here.
All right. So Johanna is the founder of the Family Imprint Institute. Johanna is fascinated by what parents share with their children, the invisible stuff passed along in their very DNA. Her superpower is listening like a detective to the facts of her clients' family history. The words they use to describe their challenges leads her to where they need to begin to work, offering up freedom, insight, and new perspective. Johanna says that our earliest experiences, while we don't consciously remember them, have a profound influence on how we live our lives. Johanna works with what the body remembers and the knowledge that we are more than our own individual experiences. All right. So once again, welcome. Before we get going here, Johanna, share with our listeners where you're originally from and then where you're calling from, and then let's start.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Ontario in Canada, and I'm just in the capital now. I'm in Ottawa.
All right. Awesome. So let's start out here. How the heck did you get into this field? What got you interested in doing this type of work?
Yeah, it's quite a long story. It goes all the way back to my teens. I found myself in love with a pretty troubled guy. And I remember the day his mom took me aside and said, "You know what? Just stay away from him. He's a troublemaker." And I thought, to hear his own mom kind of disparage him in such a way, even as a teen, I got this image of sort of like driving by a wounded animal on the side of the road. And I think over the years, the harm that happened to my own heart in loving a hurt person, a young man who was disconnected from his own parents, it turned me into a seeker. Whether trying to figure him out or trying to figure myself out, why I stayed or why I thought I could maybe replace that love. And then other questions like, well, if he's so bad, why isn't there somebody out there that could help him? And this sparked a real curiosity about why people do what they do or why some people are stuck in self-destructive behaviors.
Okay, so I'm just feeling it's kind of sad to have a parent say that about their kid. I was thinking if my parents said that about me. So what happened? So how old were you when this happened?
So he would have been my first love, 16, 17,
Mm-hmm.
just a young girl. And of course, being a guest in his home and sort of seeing, his mom is pretty critical. She is pretty emotionally shut down, and learning a lot about, and I guess this is just my natural curious mind, she had lost her mom early on. So already this sort of understanding of compassion, well, gosh, if she didn't have it, how could she give it? And I think it was sort of the beginnings of what seeded becoming a therapist and all the things I've been fascinated by ever since.
So you're about 16. How does the process of you becoming a therapist unfold? You go to, what happens?
Yeah, so I actually started off as a body worker. Started off working with the somatic elements of what we carry in the body, tension and stress. And I started to see clients once a week or once a month. Those would come in regularly, and understanding, this thing in your neck or this low back stuff you've got going on, that's much less musculoskeletal and much more about what you tell me unhappy in your marriage or
Oh,
the
wow.
job you'd love to leave, but it's not quite happening. And so it was sort of this natural evolution of studying mind body therapies. I learned clinical hypnotherapy before finding my way to the work I do now, which is very much informed from family of origin, systemic theory, and epigenetics.
Hmm. For those of our listeners who don't know or need a reminder, talk about epigenetics.
Yes. So it's a field of study that really focuses on past traumas in a family, experiences that are carried, are handed down from grandparents and parents right into us. So we understand that when a trauma happens in a family, it's actually changes the way our DNA expresses. And so if we're seeing stress that affected one generation, it's going to be played out in the next one. And so for those of your listeners, you might begin to explore, some of the challenges that I'm up against have their roots with our parents and our grandparents.
Why Johanna did that topic, or does it continue to fascinate and or interest you?
Oh, good question. I think it goes back to how you introduced me. I've always been fascinated by what we share, what parents share with our children, whether that's from a modeling relational place or whether it's from this imprint place. So I think I'll be forever fascinated by this idea that if my grandfather had a trauma, that this changes something in my own father. It changes the way he can relate to me or how open or closed he might be, and then how this affects how I show up in my own marriage or how I might parent our son. The trickle effect is just forever fascinating to me.
Hmm. I mean, I guess for me, there's listening to that and hearing that again, it's at once kind of, I don't know, depressing, but also kind of hopeful that
Mm.
what I'm impacted by what happened, you know, with my grandparent, that does just trickle down. Um, I don't know. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think it's also important to bring in when the good things happen, we're also a part of the resources. So,
Mm,
we see some people, we think, oh my gosh, there's such a challenging life. And yet their resilience, their ability to work through it, where does that come from? And so, just as though there might be traumas and unresolved emotions that come through the generations, so too is the resilience and the ability to restore. And so that also gives me some hope and understanding around this big human condition we all find ourselves in.
so you started out as a body therapist, and
Yeah.
are you doing that work now?
No, I'm,
Okay.
yeah, full time in this whole untangling of the family system.
Okay. So, um, how did you make that transition? When did you make that transition?
Hmm. It was a good 10 years ago. And I think I really it was one of those moments where you find, something converges into your world and it's sort of this about face of, wow, it sort of captures you and
Mm,
wow, I want to learn more. I think for me, the big hit was it allowed me to make so much sense around that,
mm.
that first love story I was sharing, about how I show up in relationships, some of the places that I get hooked and stopped. It sort of gave me this framework to really understand myself and many of the clients I was seeing at the time with a much larger lens, a much larger view. And it all just clicked.
It's funny as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, man, I could benefit from that. Kind of exploring how I show up in certain ways, but maybe we'll get into that in a different a different interview. But how would it, let's talk about what this looks like when within the context of trauma. And obviously it's going to look differently with different clients, but can you give us an example of how you might work using the framework or the theory of epigenetics and so forth when working with someone who's been impacted by trauma?
Absolutely. So typically, the clients who will reach out don't really have an understanding that where they're shut down in their marriage or where their health seems to be sort of this repetitive cycle that they're trying to figure out has anything really to do with their family of origin. And so that's where my education piece comes in. Whenever I start with a new client, I'm working with cultivating a 3-generation genealogram. So I'm
Mm,
looking at the client as a part of a larger system. So I might ask the client, Sarah, tell me about your relationship with your mom. What description words can you give me about her? Was she warm and loving or more cold and critical? How my client describes their parents, their relationship with their parents, gives me a lot of information about how things are going in their own lives. And so I'm always building out this larger picture. When we see things like a trauma, especially those ones that aren't talked about, maybe because there's been so much grief or sadness around it, and so we're doing our best just to forget it and move forward. But it's these traumas, it's almost like they pick up speed like a snowball down a hill
mhm,
that just keeps getting bigger. Even Freud, all those years ago, talked about, what did he call it? Repetition compulsion. This idea that a trauma is merely seeking the opportunity to be healed. And we see that now through our understanding of epigenetics and even experientially through this work that I do every day. And so my role is to sort of look at the family system as a whole, understand where the trauma may have started, and to connect the dots of why that might be the influencing factor of why the client sitting across from me is really quite struck, even after everything that they've tried.
mm. So, for example, in this genealogram
Mhm.
diagram, in a sense, of the family system,
Yeah.
3 generations up. For example, if what a great grandparent had experienced a certain trauma, and the
Mhm.
client experienced a certain trauma, maybe same or different trauma, how do you use that? Kind of get more
Mm.
specific.
Sure. So let's use an example of, let's say, grandma and grandpa are living in wartime. And grandma's at home waiting for grandpa to come home, hopefully healthy and safe. But she's living in a state of hypervigilance and she's lots of anxiety. Of course, understandable for the time. But now the client who's sitting across from us is showing signs of anxiety. One clue might be she's got the most stocked what if, downstairs full of groceries and 2 big deep freeze full of soups, for the just in case. And you think, gosh, you live in, safe upstate Connecticut, couldn't be quieter or more calm. Why is reality not matching up with how the
Mm,
client feels inside? And we go back and we look, all of what wasn't processed for grandma is living through in this client's experience. And so, as therapists listening to this, if you're only working with your client's present struggles, you're only working with a part of the story. And
mm.
this new science of epigenetics that we're talking about is really bringing in some of the things that are most common, struggles with our health, coming back in balance, really giving and receiving love fully. They have their roots in our family of origin.
On the one hand, I'm thinking, wait a minute, I've got to work through my dad's stuff too. It's not just I've got to deal with my own stuff. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, oh, okay, maybe that's why this is playing out within me. So there's this kind of opposing sense that I'm getting from this.
So, I love what you've said there, because a big part is when we've blocked the love from our dad, or we've shut it down, or we're not able to receive it, we're much more likely to carry what we judge in him. And so, a lot
Mm,
of it is, first of all, what's that relationship like? And if we're open to him, he gets to deal with his own stuff. We get to deal with our own stuff. And it's much more like a aha effect. We connect. Oh, yeah, dad's pretty socially awkward. That's how I feel uncomfortable when I'm in new settings. Okay. So we have more self understanding in the context of where we've come from.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. That kind of brings the idea of kind of forgiveness and even compassion. The power of those words. Um, so, in terms of someone who's experienced complex trauma or
Mhm.
PTSD, I guess I'm curious about with epigenetics and the science of epigenetics in this framework.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about how you approach that a client like that.
Yeah. And so my curiosity right away wants to look at the echo of the system. So if I have a client who's experienced firsthand trauma, I don't believe that happens just in our own individual experience, or I should say, the last 10 years have informed my opinion that we're looking where else does this reverberate in the system. So we can sometimes see something happening at a similar time. So a trauma occurred when I'm 25. Well, I
Hmm.
want to get curious what happened to mom when she was 25? And what about both sets of my grandmothers? We see in this work something we call an ancestral alarm clock, where something will come out and be expressed around the same time. And I should say that it's only if it's unresolved for our mom or our grandparent. It's almost like the work that we do to come to peace, to integrate and resolve. It's healing things for our children and our grandchildren.
Hmm. So, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, if we look back to our parents and grandparents, there weren't podcasts like this available. There wasn't Psychology Today on every waiting room table, to give our parents a bit of a break in that we're now really at this understanding of if life isn't working well for me, I'm going to go and seek some professional help.
Right. So the fact that there may have been a trauma uh, uh, in an earlier generation experienced on or about the same time, and even prior to that,
Mhm.
does that give some kind of an explanation or maybe a reason? But how does that play out in terms of the healing process for the client sitting in front of you?
Oh, beautiful. Okay, so let me give you a client story. And this comes from one of my favorite books that I'll share a little bit later. And so let's call the client Jonathan. He's a 19-year-old. He's just won a scholarship to go away to school through his athletics. So life is going great. And shortly after his 19th birthday, he wakes up in a cold sweat, just alarmed as he wakes up, feeling very, panicked. And as any one of us who wake up in a cold sweat, maybe we change the sheets, maybe we get some wool blankets, and we just try to go back to sleep. What happened in Jonathan's experience was every time he'd drift off into sleep, he'd feel like he's going to die. There's this feeling, if I fall asleep, something terrible is going to happen. So he found his way through sleep clinics and naturopaths and sleep medications and medical doctors before even looking down this intergenerational, hallway. What could possibly be there? Coming to learn, an uncle he didn't even know he had. Uncle Colin was 19 years old, up in the Northwest Territories, changing hydro lines for work, and sadly was electrocuted and froze to death in hypothermia. So, what we know is this information, this great loss in the family system, is imprinted in the DNA. And due to the great loss, the sadness of losing his father's brother so young, his life was never talked about. And
Mm.
so now we see in a following generation, Jonathan doesn't even know about Uncle Colin, is waking up in a cold sweat with the same feelings. So if we try to resolve this just through, let's look at insomnia, instead of the trauma in the system, we miss the
Mm.
mark, which is why nothing else worked for Jonathan. So the resolution to answer your question was, Jonathan, close your eyes and imagine Uncle Colin is here with us. Imagine saying to him, Uncle Colin, look at what happens when I carry what belongs with you. You were just 19. I just turned 19. But this is too heavy when I carry it. And so the way that I'll honor you is by bringing your life forward with mine. You loved to play soccer, and so I'll go out and play soccer in honor of you. The whole idea is giving him a place back in the family system, letting him be remembered so that it doesn't have to be played out in a subsequent generation.
Well, thank you for that. That clarifies things. Is there, necessarily an intergenerational component to trauma? For example, if someone experiences trauma, does that necessarily mean that someone else has unresolved trauma?
So not in this work, nothing is always. And so
Right.
that's why I'm always looking whether maybe I have somebody that comes in, maybe I have 100 people that come in for depression. Each and every one of their geneograms will be unique to them. So I'm never working just with insomnia or just with anxiety. It really is based on what is this family system showing me? And there certainly would be experiences, I would imagine, where you are the one that starts the traumatic
Mm-hmm.
experience. And maybe there isn't that connection. But my specialty is really finding where that connection would be and resolving it from that place.
So before I ask you the next question, let me just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Johanna Lynn. She's the founder of the Family Imprint Institute, and kind of focusing on her specialization of epigenetics here. So, what is it about epigenetics that really allows you to kind of get in there, that kind of inspires your superpower in a sense?
Mm. Well, I kind of joke that I'm more like a detective than I really am a therapist. And what really sparks it for me is solving the case, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. And so that example of Jonathan is kind of perfect. It's like, so nothing's working to get you sleeping again. This healthy 19-year-old, what the heck is going on?
Right.
What's at play behind the scenes? And so for me, understanding family systemics, there is an invisible force that influences all of us, whether that be in our own critical voice, because perhaps we grew up with critical parents, whether that be in lack of confidence, either because our parents didn't have a lot of confidence or because they had high expectations of us. And so looking at everything through that relational understanding, it all just makes the human condition much more understandable for me. And I like that.
Mm-hmm. When I was at my previous placement here in Northern California, we were working with young individuals who were experiencing early signs of psychosis, and we did a
Okay.
lot of a lot of genogram work, which I really loved, and so I can really
Mm.
appreciate your passion for this. But what also came out and became clear is, when you're I think it's one thing to ask someone about, well, what's your relationship with mom or dad or whatever, but it's another thing to draw it out, put it on the
Yeah.
board, and to even symbolize that relationship with marks in the way that genograms are often done, with squiggly marks or flowing
That's
marks.
it.
That's really powerful. Um, Talk a little bit uh, about that. Again, this is going to be
Mm.
different for each client, but what is your experience when you bring this up to people that, again, we're talking about relationships not just with a person's parent or uncle, but a grandparent. How does that shift the dynamic in the room in a sense?
Aha. I like that question because a lot of the times this is a very new way of looking at things for clients. They'd never quite sort of gone in that way to understand
Right.
themselves or their own marriage or their own relationship with their child. And so, what I notice about drawing it out in the geneagram is it becomes very clear where love has stopped flowing. And
Mm.
so let's say we are shut down with mom because she's overly critical. Well, where that comes out in our current life is we may find ourselves attracted to critical partners. Or our friends may think, oh gosh, Joanna is the most critical friend I have. We don't see in ourselves that it's kind of like that shadow part of ourselves, that what we reject, we then embody and live as. And so beginning to explain to the client so much of what's undone or where that love has stopped flowing has its cost or its consequence, how this is going to kind of live out in your current life. And so to really see it in the 3-generation geneagram just makes it so clear exactly where we need to start, what's going to give the client the most strength, the fastest ability to resolve what's up for them by mapping it out in such a way.
Awesome. Once again, I'm speaking with Johanna Lynn, and she can be, or her website is johannalynn.ca. That's JOHANNALYNN.ca. I'll have that linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So, you offer workshops in this, trainings in this. Talk a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. So my favorite part of this work is really working with other clinicians to bring this approach into the front lines. So whether you're a physician or a traditional talk therapist or a social worker, all kinds of people come into the training. And it lights me up so much. It feels like a pay it forward kind of energy with how much this is given to me. And then, yes, I hold workshops live and online
Oh, cool.
where we're bringing the theory of what we're talking about into an experiential. So I think for so many of us, it's not about knowing what we should do, but it's about letting this, maybe where the love has been blocked as an example, letting that into the body so that we come from a different reference point. What I've come to appreciate so much about this work is it generates new images, often images that are much healthier than the ones we've held, sometimes for decades, where we bump up against these stuck points in our lives. And then we can foster these new images to grow healthier connections with those we love, and most importantly, healthier connections within ourselves. And so it's just such
I
beautiful
love
work.
that phrase you mentioned, which is to see where the love has stopped or where the love has been blocked. That's very powerful,
Mhm.
especially within the context of trauma in a sense. I mean, you have such a passion for this. It's palpable. I think these courses you offer must be amazing. Um, okay, so let me, as we kind of wind down here, Johanna, let me ask for any. No. What I want to ask first is,
Mhm.
when you first started out doing this
Yeah.
type of work, specifically with the epigenetics, can you talk about kind of an early clinical error you made and what you learned from that?
Yes. Yes. I almost feel the embarrassment, climbing up. I'd worked with the sister so my new client was the younger sister, and I'd worked with her older sister. So the new client comes in, and I think, oh, I've got everything I need to know about this family system, and let's just sit down and we'll dive right in. And so the questions I was asking this new client were highly influenced by my, impression of the family system. And so she's looking back at me almost like, what are you talking about? And so this learning in real time that, of course, each person has their own memories, experiences,
Mm,
even traumas of what happened for them. What is their version of what went on in the family? And so, whether you're the oldest, the youngest, this has all kinds of differentials of, how we hold these memories. And so, I'll never make that mistake again. You deal with each person like a fresh new client, not influenced by anything else.
Yeah, that's a really good
Mhm.
example. So, that was a sister of the client.
So I was working with two sisters.
Two sisters, okay.
Yeah,
And you had done one kind of assessment in a sense, one geneagram, and thought, well, okay, I got it. This is it. So you
exactly.
use that to inform how you were. That's right. That's pretty
That's
cool.
it. And what was so exaggerated about this case is, yes, they're talking about the same mom, but
Right.
what I say are core descriptors, the way that they described mom. It's like it's a completely different person. And
Wow.
really, internally, for each client, it was. And
Yeah.
I needed to be supporting them from that place.
Right. Right. Okay. Cool. Thank you for sharing that. All right. How about a go-to book recommendation, or
Yeah.
whether trauma related or not, or epigenetics related or not? What do you have?
So, who I'm reading right now is this woman named Dani Shapiro. And it's really for fun. It's fictional writing, but it's all family systems based. She weaves these beautiful tales. It's like one of those books you cannot put down about the depth of family love and I'm actually going to read all of her books. This is my second one of her, and I've just fallen in love with her writing style. But from a learning perspective, my absolute go-to book is It Didn't Start With You by my most influential teacher, Mark Willin. Really, it's such a profound book, and what I appreciate most about it is the case studies, is sort of even home things you can do on your own to begin to really put some of those puzzle pieces together for you within
Right.
understanding your own family.
Right. Okay. So it didn't start with you. We'll have that linked up. And Danny Shapiro is Danny, Danni or Y?
DANI, actually.
Dani.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. All right, Johanna, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Oh, to visit my site at www.johannalynn.ca, and you can
Okay.
find me under the Family Imprint Institute on most of the social sites.
Awesome. Well, you are certainly inspiring me, and I love talking to people like you who are passionate about what they're doing. It just oozes out of the screen here in the microphones. Really, it does, and it just it's so awesome that there are people like you out there who are working to help other people. So
Oh, well, thank you.
yeah,
It's so important to be fulfilled and doing meaningful work. So I'm so grateful I came across it.
awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us here. Take care.
Great to be here.
This episode is sponsored by CPTSD Foundation.org. And one of the great things about, for me, about doing this podcast is that I get to speak to and work with amazing people. And Athena Moberg, the CEO and founder of CPTSDFoundation.org, is one of those individuals. This woman is on fire. I got to meet her several months ago here in San Francisco. We had breakfast together and just had a really great talk. And I got to learn about her foundation and what they're doing. They provide complex trauma survivors and practitioners with compassionate support, skills, and trauma-informed education. Athena works together with expert practitioners and treatment centers, offering daily touch points to anyone currently in trauma therapy or who wants a safe place to come, feel heard and validated between therapy appointments. Some of the resources they offer are daily recovery support, healing book club. They have free support groups. They also offer this really cool thing where they can send you texts just to encourage you and help you heal on your journey. So check them out at cptsdfoundation.org/trauma therapist podcast. Once again, that's cptsdfoundation.org/trauma therapist podcast.